a quick little introduction to this conversation. Bella and I are both field workers, and we are just gonna dive into what the heck we do for work. So, Bella, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, okay. So I work as a biologist and I work in environmental compliance. So I basically make sure that energy infrastructure projects are following the environmental rules and regulations for the state and for the federal government. And sometimes that has to do with actual species. So making sure that they are being aware about any sort of impact that they're having to like a special status species, like something like an endangered species, like the Mojave Desert tortoise, or certain birds, for example. And then I also make sure that they are in compliant or make note of how if they're in compliance with regard to other environmental rules and regulations. So that could be something like with being within the right of way, like making sure that their disturbance area is correct and they're not going outside of their disturbance area, or making sure that they're not impacting waterways, or if they are, making note of everything. So yeah, I kind of just make sure that people follow the rules and don't impact anything that they don't need to.
And you're
Yeah.
mostly in the construction realm, right?
Yes. So
Yeah.
energy, yeah, basically energy infrastructure projects. And then I also do So yeah, I work a lot with construction crews. I basically hang out with the construction crews all day, and I'm just sort of there. I'm like, hey, all right. And then I also do like surveys, so presence absence surveys, just to it's pretty self-explanatory, but it's like, okay, is this animal here or not, or is there any sign of this animal? So, for example, with the Mojave Desert tortoise, I
Mhm.
will do surveys with a bunch of, maybe a couple people. We'll go out into the desert in the area that's going to be impacted. So maybe there's going to be a solar farm somewhere. Um, and so before that, there's any development, we'll go into that area and we will survey it like 10 by 10, 10-meter transects,
Okay.
and see if we can find, any sign of the tortoise, or their scat or a burrow or something. And we'll collect all that data. And then the next step is actually, if there are tortoises there, we'll go in and we'll clear them. So we'll actually excavate the burrows and then remove the tortoises and rehome them or translocate them. And then from there, the construction process will continue. So that's there's sort of two phases of my job, and then it's fun to go do these surveys, and then sometimes it's kind of long hanging out with the crews all day. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you've been on the Mojave project for how long now? Because you're still on that right now, correct?
Yeah, yep. So I'm currently working out in Mojave Desert, and I am working on a transmission line. So they're upgrading the transmission line so that it can accommodate more renewable energy.
Okay.
Um, and it's an area that does have the Mojave Desert tortoise. So I am there just making sure that and other animals too, like kit fox or the American badger or burrowing owl. We're sort of looking for all of these animals and any sign of them. And I've been out there for about a year, which has
Oh my
been
gosh. So
kind of
what
crazy.
does your schedule look like this last year?
Oh, Gracie, my schedule. It's been insane. Okay, so this is the thing with field work, and I think we've talked about this. It's like my
This is the heart of
schedule.
the conversation right here.
This is this is it. My schedule it's just been too much, I think. It's basically been I wake up every day at like 4:30, and then I'm at work at 5:30 or so or
Wow.
ish.
Yeah.
And then I'm at work until 5:30, and it's basically been 6 days a week doing that.
For a year.
And then for a year, and I took some time off because I needed to take some time off. So I took some time off in the summer. And I bounced actually around. I'm an independent contractor, so I actually bounced around to another job. And then I came back to this job. But yeah, it's basically like 12-hour days, 6 days a week, or as long as the project goes.
Yeah, no, it's long. It's
It's
super long.
long.
And yeah, no, that's a gnarly one because like I feel like I did a project similar to that last May. And like a lot of my projects are shorter projects where it'll be like
Yeah.
a week of something like that, or like the stint I'm on right now is like 10 days, which is a little bit more manageable because it's like, okay, there's like such an obvious light
Yeah.
at the end of the tunnel. But the project I was on in May, it was like 5 weeks of that. And after even just 5 weeks of 6 days a week, like 10 plus hour days, I was like, I would get to Sunday and just be like, I literally can't do anything today. Like, I just need to like lay in bed. But then I'm also
I
just
know.
like you feel like you should be able to do so much more, but then you just can't because you don't have the time in the day. Um, yeah, yeah. I told you much about actually what I do? I'm trying to remember if on our last call.
You told me a little bit, but you haven't kind of gone into, I don't think I got the spiel.
Okay, here's the spiel. Here's the
Give
Gracie
me the
spiel.
spiel.
My Gracie work spiel. Yeah, so I am doing my jobs are a lot shorter. So I'm in marine and like I feel like I change up my answer every time. This is what I was just
I
saying.
know. I know.
I'm like I changed up my title. I changed up what I do a little bit because
I know.
everything's so variable. So yeah, so I'm in the marine environmental consulting realm. And
Yeah.
so it's much more dedicated to waterways, which means that I'm pretty much always on a boat. So that kind of like throws in a whole different set of challenges, but also it's kind of fun because then you're out on a boat. And then I also just like fell into it because I never planned on doing this. And then I got my degree in dietetics, and then I was like in between jobs, and my parents were like, you should just try being out on the boat. And
Yeah.
then and then I was like, okay, sure, I'll try that. And then I tried it and I was like, oh, actually, this is kind of fun. Um,
Yeah.
and then fell in love with the pros and the cons of the schedule because I would be able to be out on a job for 2 weeks and then be able to take 2 weeks off. And then that just was so nice, especially for, and like still where I'm at, where it's like, okay, I can be doing the things that I want to do, but then when I am working, like I'm working a lot. Um, so yeah, a lot of the jobs that I'm on, it's kind of dependent. We'll usually have like a larger job that the employees like cycle through. Um, and so like this fall, there's been one like 4 month job in Portland. And so I've been like cycling in and out doing like 3 weeks on or 2 weeks on or 3 weeks on. And so it's just like what you're saying of like 6 days a week, 10 to 12 hours a day of just like being out on a boat. And then I'm also usually operating like heavy equipment. And so depending on the week, it's like
You're operating the heavy equipment.
yeah, yeah. So it's like I'm just like a small little blonde girl, like
Yeah.
out trying to like do all of these big things, and I'm like, what am I even doing here? But then I'm like, but I'm doing it. So that,
Yeah.
I give myself a thumbs up for that. So it's actually nice. The job that I'm on right now, I'm actually in the lab, like scooping the sediment into jars because we pretty much do only sediment
Mm.
collection, and so it's like collecting sediment with like a vibrocore, which is like collecting 10 to 20 feet of sediment, or it's with a grab sample, which is like a cute little like grabby, those like little stuffed animal claw grab games.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
one
The
of those. So you
claw.
kind of just take it and then grab the top layer of sediment. And yeah, and so usually I'm doing that, but this time I'm just scooping the mud, which is fun, except it's actually kind of it's like there's pros and cons to both of when you're operating the equipment, your body is just tired, but you have a lot of time to just like sit and like think,
Yeah.
which I really like. And then when you're just putting mud in jars, like you're constantly doing something. And so like the last 3 days I've just been like, oh my gosh, like, okay, you're scooping stuff, you're writing labels, you're always doing something, and you have like no time to think. Um, and so yeah, that's kind of where I am right now.
Well, and I think that's actually a funny thing that you've been bringing up, and actually something that I talk about with a lot of my other friends who do field work is sometimes you are doing a task, like you're just sitting there. Like for me, for example, I'll
Yeah,
just sit there and like watch a piece of construction equipment for 12 hours. And that's it. That's
yeah,
what I'm doing. And I have so much time to think. Like so much time. There's literally nothing else to do. And you kind of have to be on. So you
yeah,
can't totally do something else. And it's like your
exactly.
job is you need to be watching and because stuff does happen.
Hmm.
And so you're just there and existing in your brain. And we talk about this all the time. How we're like, sometimes it's really good, if you have something that you like, you haven't had the time or the space to like work through stuff, and it's awesome you get the
Definitely.
time. And sometimes you're like doom spiraling down. shit, I have too much time to think about something and I'm like
Yes,
creating my own problems. And so
exactly.
there's that side of it. And then sometimes, and it's always funny because like my mom or certain people are like, wow, your job sounds so cool. Like you're a biologist out in the field. And I'm like, yeah, but sometimes my day to day, like I'm literally putting zip ties around fence posts for 12 hours a day.
Yep.
And I like, it's such a monotonous task. But
Yep.
I also have to focus because I have to write everything down and like record everything, but it's also so boring.
Yep.
And it's sort of this, like funny, these like funny extremes. And then sometimes it's super engaging. Like I'll find a tortoise and I'm watching its behavior and trying to figure out which tortoise it is, or I'm like on a scavenger hunt looking for animals, or whatever it is, or someone's driving the forklift off the road and you're like,
hmm
wait, no, like don't stop, like you're gonna hit something. So it's sort of this an interesting thing of like being so boring and
hmm
just so not engaging where you're like going crazy and your brain's going a million miles an hour and then also like
Definitely.
so monotonous too. I don't know. It's just
Yeah.
a funny thing that
No,
I've
and
been
then
talking
it
about.
also like I have a hard time to, well, it's good and bad because if somebody asks me like, Gracie, how are you doing this month? I'm like, I can tell you pretty much week by week, depending on where I was and what I was doing, like what Airbnb I was staying in. It all accumulates. And so it's funny, like recently I'm like, okay, I know I had two like really terrible weeks in September. Like those 2 weeks, it was exactly what you were saying of just like my brain had way too much to think about, but then I was just creating all of these different issues that I didn't even know I had. And then
I
and then I took
know.
and then I took a week off and then I came back and I was in a different Airbnb and like had a lot of other things to think about.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh yeah, that was actually like a great engaging 2 weeks, but it's just so dependent and there's just yeah.
Well, and that's something, you mentioned we were chatting earlier about like the sustainability of this, where it is a job of extremes.
Yeah.
And you're there, you're out in the elements, it's really hot or cold or whatever it is, and
Yeah.
it's really long days, and you just like have to exist through it no matter what. Like it doesn't matter what is going on, whether it's with your body or your mind or whatever, like you just have to be there. And it's very, 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 very taxing. And then when you're off, you're like, I'm off. Like the world's great, and you like get a week of vacation and it's like it just feels like a completely new person, which I think is so different than a lot of other jobs, right? Where, okay, having a shorter day, like working 8 hours, like to me, I'm like, oh my God, I can't even imagine working 8 hours. Like,
I
that's
know.
pretty cool when I have like a
Yeah.
14-hour day. Like,
Yeah.
wow, or like every once in a while we get a short day where I'm like off at 2:30 or something. I got there at 5:30, I'm off at 2:30. And I'm like so much happier because I get to have a little bit of time to myself. And
hmm
like, I don't know, like in some ways it does feel sustainable because you can do bursts and then you
Totally.
do just get to be done. Like you're just off
Totally.
and free. And I'm like, that's sustainable. Like I kind of love working that way because then I get
Mhm.
to like, okay, I've been doing this big year stint of work and then I'm gonna take like 4 months off and I'm just gonna be off. But then on the other side of it, while it's happening, and I'm like, this is not good for me.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. What are some of the
killing
things
me.
that, because I totally feel that where if I get off early one day, I feel like the world is my oyster. I feel like I have that mentality of, oh my gosh, I get to do all of the things that I want to do. And that is sometimes a blessing in and of itself because if I was working like a regular job or just have a bunch of free time, I don't usually think that way. It's much more the mentality of, oh, I
Yeah.
need to go on a run or like I
Right.
need to fit this in. And then when I do get that time, it's just like, oh my goodness, I get to do this all. But I don't remember what the beginning of this question was. The things that you
Oh.
do that or like yeah, how do you keep yourself fresh? Like during like a regular
Mm.
week, like what are the things that honestly just like make you smile? Because I feel like that's something that I have to almost like kick myself in the pants and be like, okay, I know if I hop on my bike for 15 minutes, I'm gonna have a smile on my face.
Yes,
Um,
totally.
or like even, going to my favorite restaurant or sitting down and actually cooking a meal that I enjoy. But it's hard because sometimes I just get off and I'm like, I don't want to do anything. And it's like it takes that like extra kick to like do what I actually know is good.
Totally. Yeah. Well, I think that is for me a very project dependent question because
Totally.
sometimes, like right now, I'm working on a project that is, I get to be in a town,
Mm-hmm.
like in a place.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, like sometimes we're out camping in the middle of the Mojave Desert somewhere and there's nothing around. And you're just going back to your car or your camper or whatever. And
Yeah.
you're just like you don't necessarily want to like drive into town an hour and a half away to do anything because there's just no time.
Mm-hmm.
So what I've been doing in this specific situation is in the morning, I actually wake up earlier in the morning than I probably need to, and I just sit for like 20 minutes and drink my like I give myself time to drink my coffee or
That's
tea.
that's literally exactly what I've been
Yeah.
doing, like
Yeah.
specifically this last couple weeks.
Yeah.
And it's not something that I had been doing before, which I'm like, I know that
No.
everybody says just take a little bit of time in the morning.
I
I'm
know.
always like, no.
Like, no, I'd rather do the sleep. And sometimes you do
Yeah,
total, like, I totally need the sleep. I'm so sleep deprived, but I'm like, that 20 minutes that I just get to
amazing.
sit
Mm-hmm.
is so precious and so special. And it's quiet and
Mm-hmm.
dark because it's
Yes.
winter.
Yes, no, I
So,
totally agree.
yeah.
And there's something about it that it's like, oh my goodness, this time is just for me. I don't have to
It's,
be thinking
yeah.
about a label. I don't have to be thinking about driving somewhere. I don't have to be thinking about
No,
moving.
no,
It's just
it's just me.
20 wonderful minutes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Of peace and bliss. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one thing I do. I also really prioritize going to the gym.
Mm-hmm.
Like I probably go 4 times a week or 3 times like a week during the actual work week, maybe
Yeah.
four. And I also throughout the day, and like even when I'm tired, like I don't go to the hotel, I go straight to the gym. And it's like it sucks sometimes. I'm like done at 8 or whatever, and then I need to
Mm-hmm.
go to be in bed at 8,
Mm-hmm.
wake up at 4:30 or whatever. But then during the day, I really try to walk a lot and listen to podcasts and also not be doom scrolling on my phone sometimes or
Mm-hmm.
like really being engaged and present in the work even when it's really monotonous really helps.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um so that's in this job right now I can go to the gym and I am in a hotel so it's very different. Like some jobs when I'm just out in the middle of the desert like you wake up in the morning and maybe you can still have it's kind of like camping so in some ways you get that time in the morning for me, like I get to be outside and have a cup of coffee or whatever, and that's actually special too, like to see a sunrise or something. And sometimes you're out camping with your friends, and so then you get that social aspect of it, you're like, we're all camping together and it's kind of fun.
Mm-hmm.
But then I've also been on jobs where like after work we would, maybe carpool and go to the climbing gym or go into Las Vegas because a lot of the work's outside of Vegas.
Oh, that's
Like
fun.
yeah,
That's
so
a
we'd
good
like drive
spot
into
to be
Vegas
outside
and
of.
go to yeah,
Yeah.
and like go to the climbing gym or get Thai food or something just to like you have to have my friend and I, we talk about this for like once a week or twice a week, like you have to have something that you're looking forward to because
Mm-hmm.
otherwise you're just all you're doing is working because we have such
Mm-hmm.
long days. And
Mm-hmm.
then you don't feel like a human.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, and that's something that I really battle with working this way and having it be so on and off. It's like when I am working, I truly don't feel like a person because I'm just working so much and the days are so long. Like, so I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah. Well, and how do you deal with like the community aspect of it? I know that's also job dependent, but I think that's one of the things that I think about too, and kind of that sustainability aspect of it as well. And like this is where I have those two
Mhm.
battling little things on my shoulder of like one side of me is like this lifestyle allows me to actually spend a lot of time with the people that I care about because I am
Right.
somebody that has like friends in like every corner of the US, where like my
Yeah.
best friends in Florida, I have a ton of friends and like my sister's in San Diego, my family's in Seattle, I have really good friends in New York. And so with the, 3 weeks on, 1 week off, I can take that 1 week to just go spend like really good
Yeah,
quality time with people. But then if I'm working somewhere that I don't necessarily have a community built up yet, then you are kind of battling that like, okay, I could work a super regular job and like be going home and have dinner parties with people that I know because I've been pouring into the same hometown for however long, you know.
I know. I know. That's actually been probably the biggest struggle I think that I've had with the job that I have and then also the lifestyle that I have. And I think they're kind
Yeah.
of, okay, so I live pretty nomadically. I live currently the most recent iteration of the vehicle that I'm living in is a truck and a camper. I did have a van. I had a CRV and then I had a Subaru Outback. So we're kind of going all over the place, but and I haven't, I mean, basically since 2021 or so, or 2022, I've been in a vehicle, like, or traveling.
Yeah.
And I think the community aspect of it is kind of exactly what you're saying. First, just looking at my lifestyle and like
Hmm.
when you live that way and you're like I am a big climber, so you follow where everyone's going. Like,
Hmm.
oh, okay, in the fall we're gonna go to Vegas, and in the spring or in the summer we're gonna be up in Squamish, and then we're gonna be in the valley, and then we're gonna, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Um, and you're sort of like following the circuit, and like you end up finding people that you know everywhere you
Everywhere.
go.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and it's exactly what you're saying, or like I get to be off when I'm off, and like I got to go visit my bestie in North Carolina, and like I got to put time and effort into seeing these people. Um, which is great, but then also it feels very spread out too, because it's like, oh man, like everyone, the community is sort of just happening on circumstance. It
Hmm.
isn't necessarily like, and I do have friends literally all over the world,
Hmm.
but we're not coming together sort of unless it's like convenient for us in a
Hmm.
way. Like, oh yeah, it's like climbing, it's a good climbing season to go to wherever. Like, do you want to get together? Because I want a climbing partner or whatever. And I think sometimes that feels slightly different than if you live somewhere and you're getting together just because you live somewhere and you're in that community,
Hmm.
as opposed to like running into somebody that you love and you love to hang out with them and you like running into them in,
The
Vegas or
grocery store or
whatever,
something.
the crag. I don't know. Um, and that can feel, for me, it's felt a little bit challenging to navigate because then I also have this job that is all over the place. And
Well, and
oftentimes,
it
yeah,
like I mean, for me, I'm like I do just feel like they feed into each other in a way,
yes, yeah,
which it's that same like kind of same thing of like, okay, there's two sides to that too, where like I love that lifestyle. I love being
mm,
able to be all over. And then also if I am going to have roots somewhere and be like, okay, I'm actually going to pay rent in this town, then I always feel a
yeah,
little bit stupid because I then am working for 2 weeks or 3 weeks out of the month somewhere
right.
else. So then it's like they totally feed into each other and even like just lifestyle wise, right? Where if you're living out of your truck half the year or living like I have my van, so if I'm not working, then I can just be in the van, but then you can also be really easily living out of a hotel or the truck working as well. And so it's like they pair so well together, um, which makes it really hard to stop.
I know.
Yeah.
And it's also then the finances of it come into it too,
Hmm.
where you're like, man, financially, it doesn't make sense for me to pay rent or
Hmm.
whatever. But then at the same time, and as I've sort of gotten a little bit older and like progressed into
Yeah.
this like this job and this lifestyle, I have really recognized the value in like actually rooting somewhere and like it is okay for me to spend a little bit of money to know that my stuff is somewhere
Yeah.
and not spread at like 16 different friends' houses and my mom's house. Like,
Hmm.
at one point I had stuff in my mom's house in Durango, my friend's house in Flagstaff, my other friend's house in Oregon, and then some stuff with Emily in Mammoth. And I'm like, oh my God, like and stuff in my van or my Subaru at that point or whatever it was. And I'm like, this is too much. Like my bike's over here, but my bike bags are over here, and my climbing stuff's with me, I think, but I don't have everything because the other stuff's up in bed because I was gonna go back up there. And then and I had something in like Idaho at some point, and we're just like,
Yeah.
and like, and it's all because I didn't want to spend money on like a storage unit. And
Hmm.
it's like, and then the second that I got a storage unit, it was like crazy how much better I felt. It was crazy how much better I felt just to like know, oh yeah, okay, I can go back to that storage unit, even if it's not where I want to be. Like at least I
Hmm.
know I can go back there.
Yeah.
That's been sort of like a funny thing, really like really finding the value in having a place to go back to, whether it's a room or a storage unit or whatever it is, because I think we need that. Like we need to feel secure, like we need to feel rooted in some way. And I think my challenge with all of this and with my lifestyle and my job and all that stuff is finding roots that still allow me to explore the way that I want to. Because I do, like I want to travel and I don't necessarily need to like move into a house and like live somewhere. I don't need to do that, but I do need roots. So what does that
Hmm.
look like for me? Because it's going to be a lot different than somebody else's roots, but it's still important. Still
Hmm.
so important to have. Um, and that kind of, brings it back to community and like, how do I maintain that community? Which I think is something one of what your question was. Um, and it's been really challenging, especially with this job in particular that I've had, because it's sort of in a place that I don't really vibe with. Like Mojave, California is not necessarily
Hmm.
somewhere that I want to like be, and it's not really a place where the community is like really reaching, like speaking to me in any way. And I have spent a lot of time just like wanting to be other places, which makes the actual like job and getting through the job like pretty emotionally challenging because I'm like always wanting to be somewhere else. Um, and it's been sort of an interesting space for me where I've been like really kind of I've like really been feeling that desire and that need to have roots and
Hmm.
like not totally sure how to get it, and feeling kind of stuck in a way. I'm like, okay, but I'm doing this job and I'm making money and I like don't know what else to do. And I don't have the space necessarily or the capacity to like think about what's next because I'm working so much. Um, and that has made me feel a little bit stuck until my brother, shout out to my older brother, he was like, Stella, you can get out of it. Like you can do whatever you want. Like if it's not working for you, just make a shift. And sometimes I think I forget that because I'm just like, this is what I'm doing. And it doesn't make sense for me to rent anywhere, and it doesn't make sense for me to this, blah, 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 blah. And he's like, if you need it, you need it, and just you can do whatever you want. Like you're not stuck. You don't have to do things, you
Yeah.
can make it work for you. Like, and you
Yeah.
have to make it work for you. And I think
Hmm.
especially with this job, like the culture of it is to work and work, 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 because it's a construction project. So the construction workers are they're being pushed to work. And they want to make a lot of like people want overtime. They want overtime and they want to make a lot of money. And then all the biologists, as contractors, you don't know when your next gig's going to show
That's what I
up.
was just about to say. It's really hard.
Yeah,
Like the contracting culture is interesting because of that. Oh, I don't know when my next job is going to be. And like that's how
right.
I am, even though I am like not, I'm like I work for a subcontracting company. So it, but it's still that like I don't know if I'm going to be working 1 week. I don't know if I'm going to have like a month
No,
of work. Like you don't know. And like I
you don't
never
know.
know until like 2 weeks in advance. And so, or
Oh,
less. And so then it's like, it's
yes.
so hard because it's like, okay, you don't want to say no to anything, But then if you're not saying no to anything, then that could mean that you have an insane amount of work. And
Yeah.
then like and then 3 weeks of or 3 months have passed and you're like, "Oh my gosh, like when was the last time that I actually like took a breath and wasn't thinking about like the next job and the next thing?"
And that, Gracie, is something that just recently I finally have acted on actually not always being at the whim
The
of
work.
like the company
Mm-hmm.
basically, or like I've sort of just decided I've stuck to my guns on the days that I'm going to take off because
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really really hard, and it's just the contracting world, like exactly like you're saying, like you just don't know. I mean, you it could literally end tomorrow. It could totally end tomorrow. And that happens. Like I've had that where I am tomorrow or next week I'm supposed to start a project, and then 4 days before
They're
the
like,
project
"Just
starts
kidding."
we're like, no, we didn't get the permit. Actually, you know what,
Yeah.
this happened to me in July. I was at work on the project, like literally there, and we got a call that it needed to stop immediately,
Oh my
and that was
gosh.
the end of it because they
How
didn't
long
they
was
didn't
it
have their
supposed to
permit.
be?
Oh, a couple like 2 months or so, a couple months.
Oh
And
my
it was just like,
gosh.
they're like, sorry, we don't have the permits. And I was like, okay, cool. That was my work. And that was it. And that
Yep.
happens.
Yep. And then it's like,
And
okay, cool, surprise 2 months off. But then it's also like,
yeah,
surprise 2 months off, but I didn't plan for it at all. And so now I don't really know what to do with this free time. But then it's like, you can't complain about it because it is free time. And so that's another.
right. And it's hard though, because it's like but then you can't take advantage of it maybe in the ways that you would like to because you didn't know it was going to
Exactly.
happen.
Yep.
And then you have the financial aspect of all of it. And what I finally just decided to do, I was like, all right, whatever. I'm going to get myself in the position where I'm now planning my days off,
Mm-hmm.
and this is when they are, and I'm going to stop compromising on them because I kept just saying yes, 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 and yes. And then I was just getting totally burnt out because I wasn't ever able to recharge.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sort of just deciding that it's okay for me now to take the loss every once in a while. Like maybe, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
maybe I say no and I don't get work, but I need to take time off. Otherwise, I'm not going to make it. Like you're just not going to
Yeah.
make it.
Yeah.
Like you have to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
You have to take that 20 minutes in the morning with the coffee. But you have to do that on a bigger scale too. You have
Totally.
to do it. You have to carve out time. Because otherwise you'll just get like mowed over,
Mm-hmm.
you know. That's something I've found. And it also depends on like your financial situation. Like you have to get in a place where you can actually do that. But then yeah, I don't know. It's kind of a wild world. Like it's sort of like the Wild West. That's how it feels to me. I'm like, this is the Wild West. Like literally anything goes at any time.
No,
You
it's
don't even
true.
know.
Yeah, no, and like what you're saying, it's like, oh, maybe I don't actually have any work now because like you never know. Or maybe
You
I have
never
so
know.
much, or yeah, or I
So
don't know what
much.
my day is gonna look like. I don't know what my week is gonna look like. But then it's like you have to be okay with that, and that takes a certain kind of person too.
I know. It does take a certain kind of person. Well, how do you work with that? Like, that's something that's, I end up being more friends with people who are contractors because I think they sort of understand that
Hmm.
you have to have this like certain level of commitment, and you kind of have to like always be on call for like
Hmm.
whatever's going to happen. And, you know, we, me and my friends have this sort of understanding, like, oh yeah, I would love to climb with you this weekend, but it's always work dependent. Like, because we don't even know if we're going to get a weekend. Like, maybe surveys will come up or something, and we're like, yeah, I got to do that because I don't want him to not ask me next time.
Hmm.
And has that like impacted any friendships or anything for you or anything like that? Like,
A little bit. I I do feel like I feel guilty to falling into that like those sentences of like,
yeah,
yeah, I don't know because it is work dependent. Um, but I think what you were saying with honoring like the way that I've been trying to look at each month more specifically is like,
yeah,
okay, I need to make sure that I have at least a week off every month. That's kind of where I'm at
yeah,
with like my scheduling at the moment. And so if it is really, especially if I'm up in Seattle and I'm doing work up in Seattle, I'm like at my parents' house probably, and the whole business is run from my parents' house. And so
Yeah.
honestly, I think this is the main thing that I've had to deal with because I have a little bit of the both employee but then like familial daughter burden of like
Mhm.
on Monday. So Monday and Tuesday were like my weeks or my days off this week, and then Wednesday I was driving down to Portland. And it's hard because Monday and Tuesday are still a work day, but they were my two off days that I was like, these are my days that I'm going to be able to go out for like a 3 hour bike ride if I want to. I'm going to be able to just like cook food. And there was one day that like my mom came into the kitchen and she was like, one of the fiber cores broke in Tacoma. Like somebody needs to go drive down there right now. And
Yeah.
I was honestly really proud of myself because I was like, no, I'm not doing it.
No.
And
Yeah.
that's hard for me because it's like it really is like in those
Yeah.
cases it's like maybe 3 hours of billable work, which is still work, but I and like I don't know, even like a year ago, I would have been like, oh my gosh, yeah, I got it. Don't worry about it. Like, I'm always here.
Right.
I can do everything, you know. And so that's what I think I have a harder time with, especially like if I'm at home and it's like
Yeah.
it's less likely for me that it's gonna be on actually no, that's not true. I was gonna say it's less likely that it's gonna be just like a big thing that I have to go do. But we were on my whole family was in Thanksgiving last Hawaii. Or no, sorry, we were all in Hawaii last
Oh, why
Thanksgiving.
last
There we
Thanksgiving?
go. Like I've had a full work day today. The brain is a little bit mushy.
I'm I
Yeah,
get
so
it. I
we
get
were
it.
in Hawaii last Thanksgiving, and I like 2 days before we were supposed to go home, I was gonna be flying back to San Diego, and I my dad was like, "So can you actually not go back to San Diego, but just fly to Guam really quick? Like, can you just fly to Guam really quick?
Yeah.
Like, I need you to do a little health and safety check." And I was like, "Well, I guess so." But that little like saying yes to Guam actually meant saying yes to going from Hawaii to Guam and then directly from work in Guam to work in New York. And like
Yeah.
oh my God. And I honestly, part of the reason I said yes to the whole thing was like, it's the fun part of like, who gets to go
Yeah.
to Guam? But then also, I was in grad school and I was like focusing on people that were traveling and trying to be able to live a healthy life while
Wow.
traveling through time zones. And so I was like, sure, totally, I got this. Like, I'm gonna be a little experiment. Can I be able to like stay mentally sane while doing this?
Totally.
And
And
no, no, it was
no.
horrible. It was actually really bad. I was like, I'm gonna do everything that I can. I was like, I'm gonna be able to work out. I'm gonna be able to like
Right.
now. And oh my gosh, going like whenever you're going from west to east, it's fine. But then whenever you're going east no, west to east, like it's just horrible because you're losing days or you're losing like hours of your day every day.
Yeah.
And so flying back from Guam, I was only there for I think like 3 or 4 nights, but then you have to have a night in Honolulu. So that day you like are on an 8 hour flight and then you lose 2 hours. So then you get there and it's like you left at 7:30 in the morning and then it's 8 p.m. when you arrive. So it's like your body's not that tired. And then, but your mind is like, you're not that tired, but then it's like, oh, but I need to go to bed because I need to do this same flight tomorrow. So then the second flight was from Honolulu to San Diego the next day. So that was day two of flying and losing like 3 hours of my day.
Yeah.
So then I like got all my clothes in San Diego and like chucked all my, tropical clothes in a bag. And then like the next day flew out from San Diego at 7 in the morning to New York, lost another 3 hours of my day.
Yeah.
And
No,
so by
it's
the time I got to
insane.
New York, I was like my internal clock was all over the place. And I also felt guilty to just saying that time like jet lag doesn't exist because sometimes I think if you're sleep deprived enough, you can just like fall asleep and like jet lag doesn't exist. But in that case, it was not the case because I
It's
had
not the
just
case.
lost like so many hours of three
Yeah.
days that I was just like so awake and it was just a horrible week of work. And
Yeah.
it was December in New York and oh my gosh, this is also a
Dark.
side note, but that job was like we showed up, this is just speaks so much to the entire contracting world. So like we show up and it's a kind of like we're feeling it out job. So
Yeah.
that we show up and we're supposed to be doing like this high volume water sampling, but they didn't tell us what or where we were going to be doing the sampling. So like it's my dad and I on this job, which is really fun. Like sometimes I get to work with my dad, which is just like fun, like father-daughter bonding time. But we like show up and so we're like, okay, so like we're just going to like these outfalls in the river, right? And they're like, no, 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 we're not actually doing that. You're going to be sampling in the sewers of New York.
Yeah. And you're like, okay.
And so it was just like, it was one of those things where like my dad and I look at each other and we're like, okay, so we're gonna do this? And
No.
like
Yeah.
they literally didn't tell us what we were doing. So like we would have brought entirely different clothes, like entirely different
Yeah.
PPE if we knew what we were going
Totally.
to be doing. We probably would have said no to taking the job
Right.
in the first place. And so we were like, yep, yep, we're gonna do this. So like for 3 days, we're like in the sewers of New York sampling. There's so much stuff coming up in the water. Like it's disgusting. Um so yeah, it is hard to say no to
Well,
work.
yes, well, and also, Gracie, I think something that really like jumped out at me when you're talking about this story is the stuff that you actually are doing during the day sometimes is
It's
just like
weird. You're like, how
really
did I get here?
weird.
Yeah.
How did that's the thing. And like how did I sort of like you, I sort of just like happened upon this job. Like I met someone and they ended up needing people for surveys and he like put out a
Yeah.
call on his Instagram and I was like, yeah, I can walk a lot in varied conditions and I have a
Mm-hmm.
a environmental degree and I'm available.
Mm-hmm. There we
And like
go.
there you go. And then like I get a call from the PM project manager and he's like, well, can you come out tomorrow? And I'm like, okay, I'm in Mammoth and you're in Vegas, but give me like 2 days and I need to move out of my house and I'll be there.
Yeah.
Like, the stuff that you're actually doing, like sometimes I talk to my mom. She's like, oh, what'd you do today? And I was like, I just dug a bunch of holes. or, or I put a bunch of zip ties on some poles. Like, what did you do today? And you're like, oh, yeah, I was in the sewer all day in New York. And you're
Yeah.
like, oh,
Yeah.
like,
No, that one was
what is
probably the
my
worst
life?
one. But yeah, it's just like, what the heck am I doing? But then you're like,
What am
then
I
you look
doing?
back on it and it's like that, well, that's a funny story, I guess. So
It is a funny story.
yeah.
Like those times, well, and then you have all the what going, coming back to like having so much time. You have all this time to think about it. And you're
Mm-hmm.
like, what am I doing? I'm
Mm-hmm.
just putting zip ties on a pole for 12 hours a day. Like, is this what I should be doing with my
Yeah.
life? Like, I'm in the sewer with my death, you know? But another thing that jumped out at me with that story is the I have some of my best friends from field work because, you get put in these silly situations with people
Yeah.
for 12 hours a day or whatever, and
Yeah.
you're just like, stuck with them
Yeah.
and you just have to do it. And it's ridiculous. Like sometimes it's just absurd, but you do kind of bond, you bond in those moments. And it's actually kind of lovely to like
It
have
is.
people to do that with.
It is. No, it very much so is. But the other side of that too is sometimes you're stuck with people that you do not
Yes.
work with well for
Oh gosh.
really long periods of time. So then that's where it's like, okay, it is the super extreme, or, it's one extreme or another where it's like, we could become best friends, or I'm gonna hate this person for a month.
Yeah.
You never know.
Well, and that's really tough when you get the ick.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you get the ick and you're like,
You're like, oh gosh.
you
Yeah.
could literally you blink and I'm annoyed.
It's so true.
So that's tough. And
Yeah.
then when you're tired and hot and people aren't their best selves, like no one
Bad.
can be their best self. So
Bad.
you have to like have a certain level of patience for sure, which is
Hmm.
yeah, tough when you're burnt out.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah,
Yeah.
gotta love some field work.
And if you're on your period in a predicament spot.
Oh my gosh. I was talking to one of my coworkers the other day and we were both on our periods and we were talking about how like we felt horrible. Both
Hmm.
of us felt horrible. And we were just like laughing about how like it just happens and you like feel like you're going back to being like the first time it ever happened, and you get totally caught off guard, and you're like, how did I get this caught off guard? Like I should know how to deal with this by now. It's like
Yeah,
always the worst timing.
it's true. Well, and like sometimes on the boats we don't have bathrooms on the boat. And so like
Oh
if
yeah.
you're out there all day and you're like, I need to go pee. Can we please go back to shore? I need to go
Yeah.
pee.
I really need to go pee. Oh, I know. We have this like, or it's so funny. Like sometimes we'll be like you're like walking out in the middle of the desert and you're like squatting behind a creosote bush. You're like, everyone look that way. Like
Just
I
turn
gotta
around
deal
really
with
quick. Yeah.
my body
Yeah.
right now. And it's like, oh, so funny. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's true. Yeah. Okay, well we have like probably like 15 more minutes until I need to start my bedtime routine.
I know.
I'm
No, I
like
get it. I get it.
half dinner. I feel like I had another question I was trying to think of. I was thinking today on my run, this is definitely somewhat, I think probably more me specific, but I was out on my run today and I was like thinking about like questions and things. And then I was like thinking about, the conversation of like, how do we even get here? And it is a little bit funny because
Yeah.
I do feel like the lifestyle piece of it does kind of set you up for field work.
Right.
But then also, like for me, I feel like right now I'm at this really funny point of like, I do feel like my parents kind of genetically modified me to like become this like perfect little combination of the two of them. So I'm like, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but like it's funny because like I grew up with this whole world. I don't know what your parents did, but
Yeah.
like I grew up with my dad disappearing for like a month to Kazakhstan or like, and like
Right.
even look thinking about it now, it's funny because like I was very much to the high schooler that was like, oh my gosh, like I want to get out, I want to do things, I want to travel. And so then to like be stuck in high school, just doing the same thing over and over, and then like seeing my dad like go out and do all of these really fun things, but then also be working a ton because he started the
Yeah.
business, and then would disappear for like a month at a time. Um, that like weird balance of like okay, that's cool. Like knowing that like that's what you do and like that's so cool and I kind of want to be able to eventually be a part of it, but like I never really realized that. And then
Yeah.
it's funny
Yeah.
because like my mom, I studied dietetics pretty much because my mom like had this huge health crisis and a lot of it came back to food. And so like now I'm like looking at my life and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, like part like all of my education was like poured into like the things that went wrong in my
Yeah.
mom's life and like what
Yeah.
caused like some of this like family trauma. I'm like, this is like a family trauma conversation, which
Oh,
like
yeah. Yeah.
my
It
family's like
always comes
super.
back
I'm
to it,
like,
you know?
my family's absolutely wonderful, but like if there were 2 points that I'd like have to point out that I'm like, okay, why am I the way that I am? It's probably these 2 points of like my
Yeah.
mom's like thing with food that like, she basically had like a year where she couldn't get out of bed. And then my dad always being gone and asking those questions of like, is this something that's sustainable long term? Is this something that like, and my dad did such a good job like incorporating it into family life. Like he was able to, work a ton, but then also take time off. And then that time that like he had off,
Yeah.
like is so special and so wonderful. And so yeah, it's like it's funny because I'm just like I'm at that point where it's just like it it is funny because I'm asking all of those questions and like, can you have a good diet and like do field work? Can you have a healthy, sustainable life
Mhm.
doing field work? And like kind of looking at it, seeing like how my parents did it and just being like, okay, like, is that what I want to do? Is that not what I want to do? But it's just funny because I'm like, I feel
Yeah.
like I've like fallen into it in this way of like it is epic, but also like, okay,
It's epic
I
for
really
sure.
need to think about it?
Well, and totally. And something like for me personally that I have dealt with is I have dealt with like a lot of health problems, and I currently
Yeah.
am dealing with a lot of health problems. And I'm at this decision point of like, is this lifestyle actually okay? Like, it
Yeah.
might not, I actually don't think it does work for me, frankly. I think it
Yeah.
is a big part of my health problems, just always being having really like pretty much elevated stress levels all the time in a lot of different ways, not just from
Yeah.
work, but like just my life and like not having any routine, I actually think is really hard on my body. Um, and also on the dietary things, like I'm really sensitive to food and like my digestive system is really, really sensitive. And it's like, can you have a good diet while on field work? And I spend a lot of energy making sure that I do, because otherwise I like totally fall apart. Like I don't have
Yeah.
energy and I
Yeah.
get really bad headaches and I like my digestive system's all messed up and like all this stuff. And but the amount of effort that I put into that is,
It's a lot.
you know, it's a lot, especially
Yeah.
compared to like everybody else. Like, and everyone else is like,
Totally.
oh, we're gonna go get dinner
Yeah.
after this really long day. And I'm like, I gotta cook. I
Yeah.
can't. Like I have
Yeah.
to cook my own food. And same thing with my, living in a vehicle. I sort of gave myself an ultimatum. I was like, Bella, if you're not going to eat this way, you
Hmm.
can't do this. Like, you're not allowed to live this. Like, you can't live this way because otherwise you're going to fall apart. So I
Hmm.
actually, I gave myself an ultimatum in order to like make sure that I fuel myself in the way that my body needs it. But I'm curious, do you think it's sustainable for you?
Oh, see, I've been consistently doing it for like almost 2 years now,
Yeah.
and I don't think it's sustainable long term. I think right
Yeah.
now it works, but I also know that like a reality is if I'm like I want to have kids at I don't know, 28,
Yeah.
30 or something like that. It's like if that's something that like I want to have in my life, then I cannot have all of my finances based on field work because I know that that's something like down the line that I'm going to want to prioritize more, and like I also think that having that community and like having somewhere to actually call home and like putting the time and effort into it is something that like is slowly creeping up.
Totally.
And
Well,
like it's really
yeah,
hard to then not have a reason to be in that place or like even if I'm like working for 2 weeks out of the month somewhere else and then like just have 2 weeks off and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna just be in Seattle or wherever I choose to call home, but not be working in that place, it's harder to actually want to be there
yeah, yeah.
because then it's like, okay, well, I could be doing all these other things that I want to be spending like my time
No.
and money doing. Um, and so I do think that there is an importance in, I think I'm going to get to that point of like, okay, like, and I know that I'm getting there soon. Like, I'm like
Yeah,
on the fence right now of like, is this something that I like pull the, like, start really thinking about like this December? Like, there's this house that I could move into in Seattle. And I'm like, do I do that December and like, you know,
yeah.
do that like starting this spring, or do I just go full adventure mode and like go to South America or something? So it's like
Come join me.
I know. So then, and
I
then I'm also
know.
like, but I'm also, 23, about to be 24. So like, I don't know. I'm like, I'm at that
Each
point where I'm
time.
like, why should I not just go to South America? But then I'm also like, but I also know that for my like mental health and
Yeah,
general health, having that
yeah.
place to call home is really, really nice. And
So
so
nice.
then I'm like, that's the happy ideal of like maybe I think being able to do a little bit less field work, still have it like
Yeah,
incorporated, but then have a really good reason to be home is good. And honestly, I'm like, I don't even think that needs to be work. I think that that can be consistently
right.
going to a trail running club.
Right. No, it's
You
Run
know?
Club. It's
Yeah.
totally cool. Yeah, we love Run Club.
Yeah. And I'm like, I would like, there's a club that I'm like, I would really like to be able to be there like
Yeah,
Tuesdays and Thursdays, but I
every
can't be there
Tuesday. Yeah.
every Tuesday and Thursday. I'm like, I have like friends that I think I would probably make or like have better friendships with people if I could be there. So I think that part of it where I'm like, okay, yeah, I'd be very content podcasting or remote working those those days of the month or whatever. But yeah, I do think having that community that you're going back to and like choosing and also choosing to kind of make a sacrifice for is important. I
Yeah.
think what you were saying of like, yeah, it's convenient to go climb when you're not working and you want to go explore somewhere that's in season, but also just being like, okay, I'm actually going to stick out the month of December in Seattle, even though it kind of sucks, but like there's people and things that I still want to be doing.
Yeah.
And like being
Right.
like, I'm actually going to put my time into that rather than go and do something else. So that is,
Right. I'm gonna like root in just
yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's so important to do that. Oh man, I love run club.
I've
Well,
been
and I
trying to
think
join like Portland run clubs, but I'm like, it's not the same because I'm like, I'm not like long term trying to choose Portland and kind of what you were saying with like
right,
Mojave. It's like I'm like I love working in Portland. It's a great place to be, but I do not want to be here. Like I'm not choosing to be here in the same way that I would be choosing to be somewhere else.
totally.
Yeah.
Oh, totally. It's so well, and that's sort of like with seasonal work too. Like,
Hmm.
and something Emily and I struggled with. Emily's a friend of Gracie and Hinz. Something we struggled with when we were living in like mountain towns, small mountain towns like Mammoth Lakes. That's all
Hmm.
seasonal, and it's like everyone's just
It's fleeting
there, but they're not there.
there.
They're
Yes.
not there for long term. And then it's like with this lifestyle, that is you, like all the time. You're like, yeah,
No,
I'm gonna
exactly.
just
And I think
go
that's
do
the other
this.
thing that I have like a hard time identity wise with too, because I don't like the word nomad. When people are like,
Right.
"Oh, like where do you live?" I'm like, "Well, I don't really live anywhere, but like I hate saying that I'm a nomad." I'm like
I
distinguishing
kind
it
of know
because
what
I
you
feel
mean.
like that like it's hard because like the connotation that goes with it is that
Yeah.
or like in my mind the connotation is that you're constantly on the move and you don't really care about anywhere enough to call it home.
Mm,
And I'm like, I so don't resonate with that. And I honestly don't know where I came up with that definition. I'm like, that's definitely not like a textbook definition. But I have such a hard time with that because in my mind, that's kind of what I think of. And
yeah.
then I'm like, but I have all of these places that have people that I love and that I do care so much about, and I would love to be able to spend more time in. And so that's where I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't resonate with that in the same way that somebody that is maybe doing seasonal, like your more typical seasonal worker of like, oh, I'm going to the ski town in the winter and then I'm going to go rafting in the summer and then I'm going to do this and I'm going to be international. I'm like, yeah, that's great, but that's not like, that's not where like my soul sits with that
Yeah,
in a
you're so
way.
you
Yeah.
want those roots.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And I mean, it does go back to that like intentionality piece too, of like, okay, how do I want community to look
Mm-hmm.
for me and like
Mm-hmm.
putting effort into that. And that is something that is, especially as we get older, like people people start doing their own things. And if you're not there, like
You miss out.
those connections just kind of fade away. And you
Yeah.
have to like be really, really intentional about that. And maybe that means not being in the best spot for rock climbing in October. You miss out on Rocktober or whatever because like go hang out with your friends and just like have tea or whatever with them in Seattle
Yeah.
or whatever it is. But it's like, yeah, it's such an interesting, it's such an interesting lifestyle. And I don't know, for me personally, like, I don't know. I'm coming to the point where it is not sustainable for me. And
Yeah.
I need to do something else because I'm, I'm starting to care more about creating that like bigger community and
Yeah.
really and
Yeah.
figuring out what that looks like to me. Kind of like what you're saying too. Like it sounds like you have like a little bit of an alternative way of approaching roots.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily physically always being in one place and like getting a job always in that one place, but that there is this intent. I keep coming back to the word intentionality, but like I think it is really important. Like, you can't just you have to put effort into it.
You do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you really do. And like I think also, if I am working, making sure that I'm like calling a friend two
Call.
times
I
a
know.
week. Like
Not a call.
even if I would rather just sit in a warm bathtub, like making sure that I'm like going out and like scheduling and like, okay, I'm like having a call with this person. And like, even if I can't physically be there with them, a phone call does go a long ways.
It does. I
Hmm.
know. One of my friends, I was sort of, we were having actually a conversation about this and about community and about being somebody that's sort of always moving around,
Hmm.
nomadic or whatever. Um, and, he was like, oh, so I was just on the phone with his friend for like 2 hours or something. And I was like, oh God, like, I don't know if I would really, that's a long time to be on the phone with somebody. Like, I don't really want to do that. And he's like, Bella, like, suddenly 5 years passes and you haven't talked to that person and like you have to put in,
You
you
do.
have to do it if you value that. And
Yeah.
yeah, and everybody's different on that. But yeah, it's sort of it's interesting community when you don't live with the people that are in your community is you have to build it, like you get to create it. And
Hmm.
in some ways that's kind of cool because you're in
Hmm.
you're in control of what that community looks like, but it is you have to be a very active and engaged member in your own community building because it does not just happen. It's not just going to
No,
happen for
no,
you.
it doesn't. No, you have to be putting yourself in uncomfortable positions to make it happen.
Yeah,
Often I
totally.
find. Yeah.
All the
Or
time.
you're the one that's like, and like this goes with having, like a week off here and there too, of like, I'm
Yeah, I'm
usually
going to come
always
too.
the one that's going and visiting friends. And because it's hard for me to be like, yeah, come hang out at like my parents' house, or like, oh yeah, come hang out at the house that I'm subletting for like a month,
Yeah,
Where
yeah,
it's like,
totally.
I'm like, you can. And so like, but it's so much harder to offer that up. Um, and then, but yeah, I'm like, and that, yeah, that's cool because I'm like, it is me choosing to go prioritize those people. But then I'm also like, but also I would love to have you come to a house.
Yeah, come to me.
Like, I want to host people eventually.
I know. I would love to make some like really badass charcuterie boards or
Yeah,
whatever. And
yeah. Yeah, no, and like it does happen, depending on what time of the year it is. But I'm also not going to be like, yeah, come out and like sleep in my very much so a one person van with me.
I know.
Yeah.
I have actually put out the offer to people and they're like, "Yeah,
They're like,
okay.
I don't know about that. Or no, the one
Sounds
that I'm
great,
like,
Bella.
I feel like more people would jump on is I'm like, guys, I have like this really nice Airbnb in Portland or like
Yeah,
wherever I am. And then
yeah.
nobody ever wants to come because it's like the middle of the working week and they can't get work off.
They can't.
Um,
And then you're like, and
and
I
so
might be
like,
working 12
and
hours.
you have like, yeah, yeah, I know. I'm like, it will be so fun. We'll have like an hour at the end of the day to eat dinner together. And they're
But
like,
it's
yeah,
also
actually, that
6:45. I
doesn't
gotta
sound
go
super
to
fun.
bed.
Yeah, no, it's tough. And then like in my head, I'm like, yeah, that would be perfect, but it's not always perfect. So
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. Well, anyways, we should probably start our evening routines now.
I know.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, well, lovely to chat with you, Gracie.
I know.
I've like
You too.